Yeah, I mean...
Oh, man. Have you seen these helmets that the Bengals are debuting? Well, we haven't either, but we're excited to talk about it. And who better to talk about it than with Ben freaking Baby, the consummate professional from ESPN himself. He is going to join myself, John Sheeran, and Daddy McDuke as we're going to break down the Bengals alternate uniform reveal that's coming up soon. We might get into some Jessie Bates content. He didn't sign the franchise tag. He didn't sign the extension. How is that whole situation going to play out? And what is going to happen with Deshaun Watson? We kind of talked about that last week, but we're going to get in a member of Lockdown Browns to talk about that. All coming up right now on the number one Bengals podcast.
Wow. What an intro, John. Wow, I loved it. Welcome to the number one Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Daddy McDuke. I'm joined as always by John Dolly Parton Sheeran. He's got the glitz, he's got the glamour, he's got the style. He's got a great heart, big heart. Loves helping people, and he's got that beautiful voice, of course.
Jolene Sheeran, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, John, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, man. Doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm good. So I heard to the grapevine that you have moved to a much more posh area, if you will.
Kind of old news now, but yeah, thanks for finally acknowledging it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to give it away because I know you have a lot of stalkers, but I think they a lot of them, John, they're like you. They're analytical and they're geo-wizards, so they probably would have hunted you down eventually. But yeah, so I am really excited about this show. We have two incredible guests. I'm talking about Mr. Ben Baby of ESPN and, of course, Garrett Bush of Locked On Browns. But first, we got to talk about, John, we got to talk about Brinks.tv. Okay, because Brinks.tv obviously broadcasts this show with a lot more features, a lot more creatures, and they have a number of incredible podcasts of their own. And my favorite podcast, of course, is Conspiracy Now, as Courtney knows. And there's a really good show they had. I only saw the first 2 hours of this one, John. But it is about the moon being actually made of cheese. It's not just a nursery rhyme thing, John. It is a real conspiracy. And they say if you go back to ancient Urnfield culture, they say they were making a giant ball of cheese and they used too much skim milk and it floated to the sky. And the great space race of the 60s or 50s and 60s was actually, it actually was at the same time as the rising prices in cheese. And now you have the billionaire space race as we have inflation and cheese prices rising as well. So they are trying to get this cheese ball back to Earth. Fascinating podcast, fascinating theory. And it really makes you want to tune into Brinks.tv, John.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like the Soviets were just lactose intolerant because they never got there. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
Yeah, you probably are, John, because you really have to listen to the podcast. It actually explains that part. But also, we want you to share this podcast with your friends. Tell them about the podcast because it's probably the only free form of marketing that we have. And I imagine there's a small demographic of people that can tolerate this podcast, and you probably know who they are. So do that. All right. Let us get right to my favorite guest of all time, the greatest Bengals analyst and beat reporter of our era. I'm talking about Mr. Benjamin Baby. And I will tell you this about Ben Baby. Hello, Mr. Baby.
There he is.
Hey, Daddy, how you doing? First of all, the praise is far too kind. Secondly, if the moon was made of cheese, what cheese would we prefer? I think Gouda would be like, if I had to pick a cheese, I'd probably go Gouda. It's a very complex cheese. It goes on a lot of things. And also, if it was cheese country, what conference would it go to in college football? I would suggest it would be a prime candidate to be a Big Ten contender. You know, you look at it, like the cheese-centric areas of our country tend to field a lot of good offensive linemen, a lot of good Big Ten play. So could the moon be in contention to be the latest member of the Big Ten? I think that's a good conspiracy to have.
I think
we should discuss at some point in time.
Really, I'm glad that it looks like you've done the research, and I love that because I could see this going up on ESPN.com, your latest blog, because it is the off season, and this is probably more newsworthy. A lot of stuff out there, but I would say this. Actually, Ben, if you were if you saw the show last week, we talked about all the pizza conspiracies out there, and these two, there's a third conspiracy that combines them and says it's actually mozzarella cheese, because the pizza people are trying to fund their own whatever it is they're doing, and yeah, so they are trying to bring the mozzarella cheese home. But yeah, welcome to the show. And by the way, Ben Baby was on our show before he was a superstar. I mean, this man has taken off since the Bengals have taken off. I don't know if you've heard, John, but he's been asked to do a lot of things now that I'm sure you're getting a lot more clicks and views and attention and followers. And I've heard, tell me if it's true, that you've been asked to host Saturday Night Live, run for office, and a number of Kardashians have reached out to you. Which
that
one
was
of
just
these,
last week.
Yeah, that was just last week, Ben.
Yeah, I think everybody's knocking on my door except for the folks at ESPN 1530. So it's been great. But
well,
it's probably been too far, but it's fine. We're all friends here. They're good people over there, but it's still the point still stands.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Ben. That was a good joke, and you don't have to worry about them ever hearing.
I don't think he was joking, but
I'm not joking, but it's fine.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, they haven't asked me either, and I'm about 4 times your age. But look, Mr. Ben Baby, I have so much to ask you. Well, first of all, let me ask you, since we have a little bit of time in the opening here. Did you see the maddening ratings for our Bengals player, Jamar Chase? John, what was he? Not even a top 10 receiver or something?
He's 87, man.
An 87 overall for a man who's like a more complete Randy Moss. I mean, Ben, what's going on here?
It's a good question. I think the Bengals might need to get in touch with their old friend Chad Johnson, a.k.a. Ocho Cinco, to work out those Madden ratings. I think that I'm also now regretting that joke, so please let's not everyone get riled up over it, because I think it was actually a pretty good joke. And
I'm already in Mo Egger's DMs, Ben.
Oh, God, please don't. It's fine. I'm like 6 down like Mo's list. There's got to be like 7 people who get sick, and then maybe like they'll flip a coin. It'll be you or I who go on Mo. So we'll see how that goes. I like my odds with Tony or Austin Elmore. But anyways, that's beside the point for another day. I think it's one of the interesting – it's been a very kind of boring offseason to a degree when you look at it, and that's probably a good thing if you're a Bengals fan. You don't want a ton of drama. There's not a whole lot of unanswered questions about this team. But I think one of the subtle undercurrents about the offseason are – are the Bengals getting enough respect after coming off a Super Bowl run? And when you look at some of the Madden ratings, when you look at the ratings for Trey Hendrickson, for Jamar Chase, some of the ones that have come out so far, Sam Hubbard, a lot of people are wondering why the Bengals aren't a little higher. And I think, whether you want to quibble about the ratings or not, that's going to be an interesting point as we go through this offseason, as we approach the preseason, and kind of seeing how the Bengals are perceived as they get into training camp.
Yeah. I mean, really, it doesn't matter to us because it's not about having a chip on your shoulder. But, I mean, we knew. Like, you remember last offseason, it was like Jamar Chase dropped a few. I mean, smart people like John, they knew what kind of prospect Jamar Chase was. And the offseason didn't matter to them. And so these ratings mean nothing as well. But I want to get your take on something that does matter, which is the alternative helmets. The Bengals finally have the white helmets, and it seems appropriate because, yes, the white tiger is a kind of albino kind of a species of form of the, let's say, Bengal tiger. But did you know, Mr. Ben Baby, that there are only 1 in 10,000 are these white tigers, and that they're bred in Cincinnati, and that they grow faster and heavier than the orange Bengal tiger. And our Bengals have grown, our young Bengals have grown faster and heavier than other players of their age, and they have blossomed into these Super Bowl contenders. Seems appropriate. What do you think?
I think so. Maybe if that's the case, then maybe you could maybe find one of these Tigers to go ahead and play defensive tackles because they might need some depth there when you look at it. But I know that there's been a lot of hype about the helmets. I think when you look at some of the teams that have started to roll them out, Carolina, another one that's officially said when they're going to use them. I think it's fun. I think it's creative. I think it's a good way to sell more merchandise, to be quite honest. So that freedom, I think, should increase a little more revenue going into the season. But I wonder if, maybe would a white and black, a flying Bengal, would that be a bit too far? Would that be a bit over the edge? I feel like that would kind of be.
Everybody wants the leaping Bengal. Yeah, everybody wants the leaping tiger. I have yet to meet the Bengals fan. By the way, we're going to have Emily Parker on the show in a couple of weeks. Again, it's the second appearance. Can you believe it? She came on the show, saw what it was like, and then said, you know what? I'm going to do that again. That's what I love about Emily Parker. She is fearless. But I would say this. The merchandise you mentioned, you can see over my shoulder there, you can see I've already invested in the merchandise. Very expensive. You see I got the Houday little doll there, Bengal tiger. I did, yeah. But that is just because I am, of course, very happy about it. I think they looked odd with the white jerseys and the orange helmets. It was very confusing. But I think that a lot of stuff, a lot of bold moves have happened with the team overall, John, since we got Burrow. Whether it was, we talked last week, we had the DJ, they have the new DJ, they're changing the music, they're changing the, what is it? They have the, what is it, John? They have the crazy canopies and all that stuff. A lot of craziest stuff, John.
A lot of crazy stuff, but I'm curious about what Ben thinks. Like, Ben, would you rather cover alternate uniforms as the biggest headline in the summer, or maybe, I don't know, like a quarterback scandal or a quarterback holding out, or maybe a quarterback competition around the division?
I want to be very picky about what quarterback drama I would like to be covering. It's not all enjoyable to cover, as some of my other colleagues have realized, but I would say a quarterback competition like Pittsburgh's quarterback battle is probably a fun offseason storyline to look at who's going to be able to go out there. So, but yeah, that would probably be up my alley there. But yeah, I think, going back to your point, actually, I think it is interesting. The Bengals have done a really good, I think Elizabeth Blackburn deserves a ton of credit for really looking at kind of making this a more progressive franchise, from a business standpoint. You look at what they've done in terms of the new indoor practice facility, selling the naming rights to the practice field, and then that will probably, we'll see if that leads to naming rights for the indoor bubble as well. New Ring of Honor candidates that are going to come out, new jerseys that were unveiled last season. So, there are a lot of new things, and so, there has been a lot of interesting stuff to cover on that end while we fill some of the filler time between the end of the season and the start of training camp.
Well, there was one big story of the offseason, and one area where they could have actually spent real money, not the few $1,000s it costs for the practice bubble, which, by the way, actually Walmart has a great deal on practice bubbles. I got one for my own yard, and they are only a few $1,000s. But, Mr. Ben Baby, the big news is that Jessie Bates did not get the deal he wanted. And and John knows that the real story is the guaranteed money. And they offered him, I just want to get the stats, $17 million guaranteed, along with a guaranteed parking spot. And that, is a deal that Mike Brown said was very fair. But it's kind of laughable that they only give him $4 million more than he would get under the tag in a 4-year deal, John? Was it 4? I mean, in today's day and age, you guarantee at least the first 2 years, right? I mean, it's just kind of disrespectful in terms of Jessie Bates. It's like they want, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting. The Bengals actually are a team that does not guarantee usually more than a year. What they'll do is, and John can correct me if I'm wrong here, but usually they'll have a big signing bonus and they'll just prorate that over the course of the deal. Which is what they've done, with contracts recently. I had one agent, wonder if Joe Burrow is going to be the one who gets more money on that second year guaranteed. Then he might be one of the only ones. And the franchise has been very hesitant to do that with even some of their big name players. But in terms of this Jessie Bates not getting an extension and kind of the team and Jessie not getting a deal done by the July 15th deadline, this should shock absolutely nobody. When you look at what they've done going back to last training camp, even then I talking to somebody in the front office, it sounded like a franchise tag was going to make the most sense. That was before Jessie Bates didn't play well throughout the regular season, and that was before the Bengals drafted Dax Hill. So all these things, when you go back and look at it, I think the bigger question is, how much do the Bengals value a safety at that caliber? And it is expensive to pay a guy like Jessie what he's worth, because I think he is one of the best safeties in the NFL. But you have to go back, and when you look at it, and the fact that the writing had been on the wall for several months, maybe the Bengals don't believe that position is worth that money. And when you look at it, the Bengals are going to have some offensive players they're going to have to pay as well. and they're not going to, maybe the cash flow won't be there to pay defensive guys. When you look at having to pay T. Higgins, having to pay Jamar Chase, having to pay Joe Burrow, you're going to have a Logan Wilson extension that potentially is going to come up pretty soon. So, John, I'd love your thoughts on this as well, because in my mind, I feel like, the Jessie Bates extension was never a reality when you look at kind of what they've done over the last, I would say going back last 12 months.
Yeah, it doesn't quite surprise me when you say that like the tag was kind of an inevitability after, even before the regular season, because like it didn't seem like they were ever really that close, and you would have to think that before last season is when the deal was most likely to get done, because that was before the whole safety market kind of blew up the way it was. And people look at the average annual value, and that's the number that people look at first, but that's not really the full story. Is that you have guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Justin Simmons, Jamal Adams, they're raking in $35, $36, $37 million in total guaranteed money, and that was always going to be the thing that separates Bates and the Bengals from getting the deal done. There was some rumor that deal was close, but then Mulligata, his agent, kind of pulled the rug out from under them. But obviously, any information that we're going to get from this is from the agent himself. He's going to paint his side in a good way and paint the Bengals to be cheap. At the end of the day, $17 million, that would probably be, there's a difference between like full guarantees and practical guarantees, and the Bengals like to deal in the practical guarantee world where they have that roster bonus either in year 1 or year 2, which is basically, it's practically guaranteed, right? It adds on into the full amount. Like with AJ Green, like his full guarantee total for his contract was like $32 million, but only 15 of that was in the actual 100% fully guaranteed signing bonus money, and some other of it was like a 5th-year option, which is only the case for some first-round picks. So with Bates, you're talking about probably like a $17 million signing bonus, 100% guaranteed money, and then maybe like a $6 or $7 million roster bonus, which in practical full guarantees is like $23-24 million, and that's in line with what DJ Reader got. It's actually more than what Trey Hendrickson got. It's pretty close to what AJ Green got in terms of that realm of guaranteed money. So to me, it's not necessarily like a lack of value that they see in the safety position. It's almost like he's right in line with the other guys that they've gotten extensions with. It's just that Jessie Bates is that caliber of player that the Bengals don't normally go after or even entertain offering in free agency. Like, no one ever believed that they were going after Terron Armstead or J.C. Jackson in the offseason. Those guys were going to get deals that were way out of the hemisphere where the Bengals usually operate. And I think Bates is just that caliber of player, or at least his representation believes him to be, which is why they're not even entertaining the offer that the Bengals were even considering. So this just seems like a partnership that's going to come to an end because Bates is just the kind of player that they don't typically go after. But like you said, Ben, Joe Burrow might have to be the guy that break that mold.
Yeah, when you look at it, I think that the Bengals, when you look at when they spent that money defensively, and they were very shrewd in kind of what they did. Like you said, they were very judicious in who they went and got when they rebuilt the defense. When you talk about guys like DJ Reader, Trey Hendrickson, Chidobe Awuzie, Eli Apple, to a certain degree. I mean, those are all guys who were not getting top of market deals. It's worked out. I think Lou Anarumo deserves a ton of credit for what he was able to do with that defense last year. We'll see if they're able to replicate that this year. But then, I wrote it right after the draft. When you look at what they did, they drafted a lot of guys who they're not going to be dependent on to be starters or key contributors this year, with maybe the exception of Dax Hill. But really next year and the year after that is when you're going to want these guys to slot in and really take over. We talked about Joseph Osai a little bit in the pre-show, and I think that I think that those kind of players are going to be asked to step up in 2023 and 2024 and beyond, especially when you look at what they're going to have to spend on the offensive side of the ball. And to win championships right now, you've got to be able to have those elite playmakers. And, for the Bengals, it was good that you had a lot of these guys on rookie deals, but now you're going to have to pay some of these players if you're going to want to keep them. And the Bengals are going to have a lot of tough decisions, and they're going to have to wonder, are they going to want to continue to spend that money on defensive players?
Yeah, I mean, what's weird to me is that we're talking about Jessie Bates, who was the best player of the defense, and the defense was the driving force behind the Super Bowl run. And I feel like you see all the players saying, sign Jessie Bates, sign Jessie Bates. They know what it would take to sign him, and they're like, still sign him. They know that they're going to be up for contracts, and they're like, still sign him. So I think sometimes teams, need to evaluate the value. They need to consider the value of that particular player on that team. And even if they don't like safeties in general, right now the team you have, that defense that exceeded expectations, is driven by Jessie Bates and his ranginess, and Dax Hill doesn't have that. I mean, he might be a great playmaker in his own right, but it's just odd to me that they are willing to let that go because of their their own beliefs about who's valued as what. Like what happened with Zeitler and, and the older Andrew Whitworth and whatnot. But you mentioned Joseph Osai, Mr. Ben Baby. And Joseph Osai, as you know, has been getting a lot of attention because really it was just one preseason game where he was dominant, but it has all the fans excited. And there was a poll recently, a Twitter poll, where, they asked fans, it was on The Athletic. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to read it. It's a very expensive magazine, but John was nice enough to send me a screenshot. And as you can see in the poll, Mr. Osai is, I can't really see it with these glasses, but something like 43%, 48% or something, people think that he's going to make the biggest impact, more than first-round pick Dax Hill. And look, Osai was a great prospect, but let's be honest, a lot of it is because he had like 8 sacks against Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in the preseason game before injuring himself. And here's my thing. What I want to ask you, Mr. Baby, is do the Bengals, if we were to take a poll of the Bengals coaches and front office, would it be the same thing? Do they believe in him the same way that the fans do? Because, look, Trey Hendrickson is great, but let's be honest, we don't have another premier pass rusher. And the nature of the league right now, you kind of need one.
Yeah, I think that we'll see what Joseph Osai brings to the table once he's healthy. He was not able to participate in OTAs, did a lot of rehab work. But when you looked at where they drafted him and kind of that pop that we saw, not only in preseason games but training camp, there is a lot of things to be excited about. He's a guy who is still pretty raw at that position and is really getting still getting the nuance of playing defensive end or edge rusher or whatever you want to call it. But I think that there is a lot to be excited about there. And, first off, I think that when you look at, the numbers you presented, that, the Athletic ran in their survey poll, and I think those guys over there do a good job. When you look at the other rookies, relative, I think there's a reason Osai was the runaway contenders, because a lot of those other positions, you're looking at areas where they're not going to be able to rotate in as much as maybe Joseph Osai will. And you want to be able to keep guys like Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard to a degree fresh and see what you can get. And I think Khalid Kareem is going to be a guy who will, that'll fall on him a little bit. We saw they drafted, an edge in Zach Carter, not Zach Carter, excuse me. I'm blanking right now on who they got.
Gunter.
Yeah, thank you, Zach Gunter. So we'll see, what they're able to have at the end of at that back end there. But Osai will be somebody to keep an eye on. I think he is going to be exciting. It's one of those things, like you said, had he not maybe done as well as he did in that first preseason game, we'd be wondering what he'd look like the rest of that rookie year. But, especially when you look at having to replace, a guy who brings a lot of versatility to that scheme, I think he's somebody that fans should be excited about.
Well, I'll tell you what else they should be excited about. It's about a rising superstar beat writer for Cincinnati Bengals, ESPN.
I got one last question for Ben, actually, just real quick, because I think there are a lot of people who are very passionate about this, but maybe not so much as Ben, at least in the Bengals media community. For everyone out there who is a fan of ESPN and all the media work, can you describe how the value, I guess, of returning to the locker room after 2 years of COVID kind of taking you out into Zooms? Can you describe the value of actually getting to know these players and be like a storyteller? Because at the end of the day, you're telling these guys stories, you're covering them from a personal stance. Can you describe the value of returning to in-person interviews and stuff like that compared to what you have been with Zoom?
Yeah, I think it's really important whenever you're able to go in and get, build relationship with players, be able to tell their stories a little bit, get more context behind the numbers. Sometimes, I remember fans will enjoy this. There was an offensive tackle by the name of Bobby Hart who was with the Bengals. That name might ring a bell.
No,
and I remember asking Bobby about a sack, I think in the 2019 season. It looked like, it might have been on tape. It was CJ Uzomah or Drew Sample or tight end's fault. And Bobby quickly said, no, that was on me. It's my fault. I should have, done this. It really wasn't on them. And, sometimes, it's hard when watching film and you don't really know everything that goes on and all the assignments in a play, exactly what happened. And I think being in the locker room, we're able to get a little more context behind the numbers and maybe tell some stories that are different, and you're able to get, as a fan, a better depth of coverage, and you're able to understand your team a little bit more. And I think you've got to give the Bengals some credit of being one of the first teams to open the locker rooms back during the OTA period and during the off season. And hopefully, with the way that the trends that are going to continue, we'll get that full access back this year. And I think it's really important. And as much more, it makes my job a lot more fun. I think fans are going to really enjoy it as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. The Bengals keep trending upwards. This is goodbye to Mr. Ben Baby. I don't think he's ever going to have time to come back on our show. He's going to be.
Hey, listen! I just signed a new contract, so I'm hoping I get to stay here for a little bit longer. So it's been great. I really enjoy Cincinnati, and I think this will be a really fun team.
No, I meant you won't be on our show. You'll be on the big shows.
I will always make time for y'all. Don't ever get that twisted. I think that's never going to be a question.
Thank you. Well, we don't want to take any more of your time. This man just got back from vacation. The first thing he did, came on our show, and we appreciate him and love him.
He actually came back early to be on our show. Yeah,
that's right.
I think so.
I changed the flight just to be here.
That is incredible. Even though it's a Zoom call, that is insane. Okay. Well, look, thank you, Mr. Ben Baby, and we will be in touch. And we would, there he goes. He's gone. That was fast. Okay. Look, John, our next guest is. Really, this man he's a Nostradamus of our time. He has been predicting the whole Deshaun Watson situation before anybody else. And I talked about it last time. Just to recap, he had a video that I saw where he's like, look, Bob Kraft, was charged with soliciting procreation. And you had Jerry Jones, which was, he was accused of assault. And then you had Daniel Snyder, who was bullying and, intimidating and harassing 40 employees. And these people have done a lot of terrible, terrible things. And we knew it was going to blow up in their faces, or he did. And they come out and they turn the whole media game against this Mr. Deshaun Watson. And people weren't considering that, hey, the NFLPA is going to fire back, And now we're seeing that. We're seeing that the suspension is probably going to be around 8 games, they're saying. So I'm going to stop talking because I don't know what I'm talking about. But Mr. Garrett Bush, the host of the Locked On Browns podcast, is a charismatic, intelligent young man who is on top of this story. Mr. Garrett Bush, so glad to finally have you on the show.
Well, guys, this is awesome, by the way. The whole concept, this is kind of fire. I'm not going to lie. This is, the whole, I'm not going to dare to guess how much
it cost.
That's, and I've priced it. I want a mascot myself, and it was like the price. I had to take a loan out and use collateral. I was like, anything with a mascot that I could use collateral, I'm not doing it. But this is awesome.
Well, Garrett, when he got his new life form, I checked my bank account, and it was at least $10,000 short. I still don't really know where that money went, but it's still an ongoing investigation.
It plays out well.
It's amazing that, by the way, John was recently promoted to senior intern, and that is why he has that kind of money to throw around, and he's in his new crib, as he likes to call it. But, of course, John is aspiring to be head intern, which means he could bring in his own interns, but pay them from his own salary. But John is the driving force, the analyst behind the show. And as you mentioned, the mascot over there, it was actually only 50 cents from St. Vincent's de Paul charity shop, But they got it in anticipation of the Bengals' white uniforms being revealed. But Mr. Garrett Bush, I want to talk about the stories that really, let's be honest, when was it that first video dropped, as the kids say? I think it was over a month ago, because I saw it over a month ago.
It's about 6 weeks ago now.
Yeah.
So, and to be honest with you, I really wasn't going to do the video. Sometimes I get inspiration. My goal was to be a full-time YouTuber, but then I figured you had to create content every single day for YouTube. So that just was that's not going to work. So basically, I was just sitting around, and I just kept hearing people say, we don't know what happened, or we don't know what happened. We don't know what's going on. And so what I did is, it was a day, and I just went.
Wait, so can you clarify, who are these people? Sorry.
Yeah, well, basically the entire media,
okay. Okay.
The local media in Cleveland, but I think they were kind of fed by the national media. So the national media is like, the conglomerate. They say one thing, and then everybody kind of either goes along with it, or there might be a couple people that say they have conflicting stories. But generally speaking, the national media has one narrative. And so when the Browns went and got Deshaun Watson, it went from they're rejoicing, excited that we were out on him, and then all of a sudden they offered him a guaranteed contract. He was like, I don't mind going to cold Cleveland. Let's get it done. So what I wanted to do is just kind of dig and go back into what really went down. And I happened to find some of the depositions that some of the allegations and some of the plaintiffs had and brought to the table during the whole grand jury situation. So he passed, or the grand jury in two separate cases decided that they didn't have enough to indict him. And we all know, people say in the law spectrum, you can indict a ham sandwich, right? You can, if they want to get you, they can get you. And so as I looked and started going through some of these stories and some of the, what Deshaun Watson's camp was saying in terms of some of the discrepancies, I found it alarming. Like, a couple of examples is, obviously one came out last week where the son of one of the plaintiffs just basically said, hey, my mom, she massaged Deshaun Watson. She said everything was great, wanted to work with him again, and then she found out that he was getting sued for sexual harassment or sexual assault, and she completely changed her story, signed up for the whole lawsuit, and he said he was going to tell, and so she promised him a certain X amount of dollars to keep him silent, and there's a couple stories like that are in there, but for me, it started off with a situation where I wanted to go and dig into it. And then from there, I just kind of figured, if I was going to argue this case, what would I argue? And that's where it kind of came up to where we are today in some of the things that I've been doing in the videos.
Well, I just want to, we mentioned the cases, the examples of the owners. And I just want to clarify, you're not saying that, hey, they did bad stuff, so what if Deshaun, that's not what you're saying. You're pointing out the way, the media coverage. And so, you show the clip of Rich Eisen with Pete Holmes, I believe, the comedian. Mm-hmm. And he's laughing at his jokes about Bob Kraft doing these terrible things. And it's that, locker room talk, which makes sense for presidential candidates, but it doesn't work for most people, right?
Yeah.
And,
No. I think after what started to happen was, no matter what information came out, you would always get people that would ignore it and just continue to move on. In the business, we call that aiming someone. It's an acronym that stands for acknowledge what they're saying, inform them, right, and then move on, right? Or some people say acknowledge, ignore what they're saying, and then continue to move on like nothing happened. So we kept getting this new information, or there were certain things out there in the public sphere where people would disregard it and say, well, it's the owners. It's the owners. They always get away with it, G. Bush, and that's just what's going to happen. And I'm like, well, no. See, a collective bargaining agreement is a contract between two people. It's not that we're arguing hypocrisy. We're saying you are in breach of contract because one person, who the owners are actually listed in the conduct policy, the owners are held to a higher standard in the language of the collective bargaining agreement. So when you don't give anything to Kraft or Snyder or whatever, yes, it's hypocrisy, but I like to get down to the facts, and I'm just getting to what union laws and everything are. But what I had to do in the last one, in the videos you're referring to, was sometimes you have to show people exactly the juxtaposition of the way they carry certain things. So in the clip, Rich Eisen...
It's very Noam Chomsky of you, sir. I don't know if you know, but that's what he does. He points out the way the media covers this, idea as, representing as this kind of violence. And he's like, well, what if it was our country doing it? They would frame it this way. And Sorry, go ahead.
Kind of like if January 6th happened and just switch the race of the individuals and say there was Sunni or Shia Muslims that stormed the Capitol. Man, that would be, we'd have an issue with that. We'd be on the first boat to kind of doing stuff. But when it's certain groups of people, we're used to just sweeping it under the rug.
Yeah, and go ahead with the Rich Eisen thing. I just want to complete that. So you showed how lighthearted the segment was about Bob Kraft, and then you showed how he gets very self-righteous when it comes to Deshaun. Now, let's get something straight. Deshaun Watson, the number of accusers is much higher. That's very clear.
That's clear.
But I mean, they're both terrible things that they're being accused of. And I think in the case of, Bob Kraft, there's video and there's a lot there, and he kind of played the legal game really well. But I don't think that if you were to ask Rich Eisen, really push him on this, I don't think he's going to say what Bob Kraft did was okay. But in that moment, he went back to being a comedian host, and that says a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, he probably would look at it now and say, by no way, shape, or form am I condoning what Deshaun Watson did. And I always say the same thing, too. Deshaun Watson put himself in a horrible position. If my mom was talking to me, and she said, listen, did you create a crime or are you going to go to jail? No, but that was the dumbest thing you've ever done, and I didn't raise you that way. So you're going to have to deal with a certain level of consequences, because when you put yourself in that circumstance, you leave your life, livelihood, your reputation in people's hands, and you can't do that. So I'm not condoning what he's doing. I'm talking about it from a legal perspective as an analyst and also as a media individual who wants to find the truth. So when Rich Eisen is laughing and joking and he asks a question, and I thought it was the smoking gun, he says, do you guys really care? Yeah, who really cares, right? And three people are like, oh, we don't really care. And I'm like, he just said that. Now, mind you, this is on national TV. He's like, hey, he's the owner. What is he going to do? Just go to a brothel in Las Vegas or something and get it over with. Come on, bro. What are you doing? So the tone was completely different. And when they talked about Deshaun Watson, there was this level of indignant, he was offended. He said, not only if 0 games are on the table, you will hear it from this chair. And not only is it an embarrassment for Deshaun Watson, it's an embarrassment for every player in the league. I was like, well, who is this guy? What came and just took over Rich Eisen's body? I'm like, look at here.
There's a bit of performativeness there, yeah.
When you show people that, they really react because it's right in your face. You can't just ignore it. You have to accept that, this is probably a double standard, and it's probably kind of sleazy a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know we haven't let John talk, but that's okay. He's just an intern. No, I'm just joking. Actually, John's the smartest person on the show. He's the only reason we have a sports show. Otherwise, it'd just be craziness. But I want to let John talk. But real quick, I just want to say that after we talk about, let's see what John wants to talk about. But then I want to just talk about, it looks like you were right, and it's going to be, I think, about 8 games is what they're saying.
That's the rumor. We have no idea, to be honest with you. Because it's from 2 games to, obviously the NFL is pushing for 17. It's going to come down to Sue Robinson, the judge, and the arbiter in this case. And that's just kind of my takeaway right now. There's a report that it could be anywhere between 2 or 8 because of what happened with the owners and the fact that they're held to a higher standard and they didn't. Their punishment didn't even come close to being an indefinite suspension. And then you have the Calvin Ridley situation where he was betting $1,500-$1,600 on games, and he has an indefinite suspension. It's a lot of moving parts that are all around here. I know that a lot of fans in general, and this goes beyond just Browns fans, but a lot of fans in general didn't like the fact that Goodell had just infinite power in his seat as judge, jury, and executioner, and there was a lot of inconsistencies and discrepancies with the punishments that he dished out for really abhorrent crimes that had unfortunately a lot more evidence compared to what Deshaun Watson underwent. I think to Garrett's point, though, from another perspective, it does seem like the size or the number of accusations and allegations coming out against Watson kind of pushes the case to somewhat of a new territory. And I definitely agree that the way that the media has covered it compared to what Kraft did and what's going on with Dan Snyder. No one sees through that at all. He's hiding away in Israel right now, to get away from a subpoena. So yeah, I definitely think that the media could have done a better job, and there's a lot of underlying things that kind of go with that. It's just a really bad situation. But I definitely appreciate Garrett's perspective on how the media has kind of covered it, and from a Browns perspective, this kind of was thrusted on you guys on the podcast, on the fan base, how to deal with this. And I don't like blame or judge Browns fans for however they feel. Like if Browns fans, want to completely get off the ship for what's going on, I completely understand that. But it's fandom at the end of the day, and you like your team, and you're going to kind of work through it the way that you want to. And I appreciate Garrett's perspective on it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to ask. Yeah, Garrett. Well, sorry, you would say, but I just real quick. The next stage is, of course, you get them on the field, but Cleveland fans are upset that their team did something like this, and we know Deshaun Watson, when he gets on the field, he's going to be better than anything they've seen at quarterback, maybe ever, and for a long time. He's very, very talented, very gifted quarterback, and not just gifted in the physical sense, but he's a smart leader, and he did it in college. He was proven. And they put a good team around him, something he didn't really have in Houston. So he can probably do the offensive production parts. But, how long will it take the fan base to buy into it?
Well, I think there's two things that complicate it a little bit. One, Baker Mayfield really has a huge following. I would say at some point in time, everybody that is a Cleveland Browns fan thought Baker Mayfield would be the next primetime franchise quarterback, especially when he breaks Peyton Manning's touchdown record, and he's a rookie, and he didn't even start the first few games. So we all saw the characteristics and some of the talent that he had. Unfortunately, over the 4 years, he was wildly inconsistent. When he's at his best, he can be a borderline top 10 quarterback, maybe somewhere from 9 to 12 in that pack. But his floor is rock bottom. I mean, if he's playing bad, you're looking at a guy that's, bottom third, 25, 26 in terms of accuracy, quarterback rating, and just making, big time plays. But there's a lot of people who were already upset about Baker. And now you're going to go get another quarterback, right? You get rid of Baker, and then on top of it, you give him the biggest guaranteed contract ever, right? So it's almost insult to injury.
And you called Baker a child for playing video games.
Yeah, and they said we wanted an adult in the room. I was just like, okay.
Well, we had a similar situation in Cincinnati, by the way. Andy Dalton was very beloved. He broke touchdown records. Mm-hmm. And, he was, compared to Carson Palmer, very crybaby, weak, kind of
you just brought this
despicable
up
human being.
Okay.
Yeah. And compared to Carson Palmer, this guy comes in as a rookie, takes the same team that Carson Palmer failed with, takes him 5 straight playoff games. They're like, this guy, he's not a superstar, but we're lucky to have him. But his rock bottom was that was bad, worse than Baker's.
I agree with that. Totally agree.
And then Joe Burrow comes along, and Joe Burrow, of course, has no legal issues or nothing. This guy's a saint. But Joe Burrow comes along, and I don't think Andy Dalton. They're like, who? It's just they're done with him. Yeah.
Hey, you know what? This is ironic. You bring up Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow is probably 60% of why the Cleveland Browns got rid of Baker Mayfield and got Deshaun Watson. And I'll explain. For so many years, when you deal with bad organizations, we give you these cliches and different things as to why they're terrible, right? Offensive line, no continuity, can't do this. We got to have the same people. We got to have 5 All-American, top blue chip people. We need a pass rusher. We need lockdown court. You need all this stuff. But what Joe Burrow did was he changed your perception in the way how football teams are built, constructed, and exactly what kind of guy you have to have and how good that person could be to take you to new heights. When Joe Burrow comes in, he's coming off an ACL. The coach, it looks like he's on the hot seat, he's going to get fired. And they go draft Jamar Chase instead of drafting Sewell to tackle whoever everybody thought that was the great thing to do. They go get his buddy Jamar Chase, and in 2 years, that man took the Cincinnati Bengals, who had a high pick. They're drafted in the top 10 the previous 2 years, and they go to the Super Bowl.
With the worst offensive line in football, maybe.
Worst. And rookies playing impact snaps. And what happened was Jimmy and Dee Haslam and all the other owners were put on notice. That's what a quarterback looks like. And if you want to be able to compete with said quarterback of the Mahomes, of the Allens, of the Herberts, heck, you even got Denver right now going with Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson. All these guys are extremely talented. And if you want to be able to compete with them, you have to have a guy like Joe Burrow. And we didn't have that guy. So they moved heaven and earth to go get Deshaun Watson, regardless of the, anything that went on.
You know what's actually hilarious, Garrett? I think Baker Mayfield is one of the biggest reasons why the Bengals ended up moving on from Andy Dalton. Because Baker was absolutely torching the Bengals in his first 2 years, and Mike Brown hates nothing more than when the Browns dominate the Bengals because of the whole history with that franchise. It's crazy that the Browns go 0-16 or whatever. They get the first overall pick, they take Baker Mayfield, and then the entire course of Ohio football changes forever.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the recent episode of Conspiracy Now on Brinks.tv, but there's actually a conspiracy, John, I'm sure you've heard, that the guaranteed money they gave Deshaun Watson was so the Bengals would be in a precarious position with Joe Burrow down the road. Because, they know that Mike Brown doesn't have money.
It's definitely a theory.
Yeah.
I think there's more fact than theory, if you ask me.
Well, I think Courtney does too, but yeah.
If you tell me, and I had this wild, it isn't even wild. I think that one theory is Deshaun Watson is not being suspended based on allegations or anything like that. The reason why Deshaun Watson is being suspended is punishment to Jimmy Haslam and the Browns for going to get him and then blowing up the structure. See, the league is almost like an Italian mob family, syndicates, right? You can't just if you're a made man and you're head of your family, you still can't just make any moves. You got to go to the rest of the people. You got to go to the rest of the council to get permission to whack somebody or get permission to start moving drugs and guns. No, you got to get the buy-in. And when Jimmy Haslam went and said, oh, Browns are out of the running for Deshaun Watson, I bet you won't be now. Let me give you a guaranteed contract. And what they did, every other owner was like, now you know good and well we don't do that. Our job is to keep labor costs low. And then you look at directly after that, look at what happens with the Baltimore Ravens. All of a sudden they don't want to give Lamar Jackson the money. They're like, well, it's an impasse, right? You look at the teams like the Bengals whose owners, that's their business. Some owners are billionaires because they got other things going and that funds their little projects over here. But certain owners, money kind of tight. And if you going to have to pay somebody, they have to have that money in escrow. That is in an account you can't even touch. So they're like, now I'm going to have to start putting that money aside, $200 and some odd million aside, and I still got to run my life and team. The owners are not pleased by that. Wow.
I think after this, Courtney's going to ask you to come on Conspiracy Now because that was amazing. I mean, I believe it. I don't want to call it. The word conspiracy has a negative connotation, but I believe everything that Garrett says. Man is very convincing, very articulate.
Well, sometimes I look at it more than meets the eye. Like I try to dig deep and kind of think outside the box, and to me, it makes sense. Maybe the NFL already knows. It's already baked in the cake. They knew exactly what happened, but when the deal happened, they went to. Roger Goodell went to both people, the Texans, went to Jimmy and D. Haslam and said, look, all right, the deal is done. So here's what we're going to have to do. We have to look like we're strong on this. So we're going to present a year and indefinite, and we're going to stay steadfast to that. However, behind closed doors, they've already negotiated what the suspension is. Everybody knows what it is. They just have to look like they care in order to keep everybody on both sides happy.
Wow. Well, I will tell you this, Mr. Garrett Bush. I understand that from a business perspective, if we're being honest, because I want our fans to look like they care by becoming patrons on patreon.com/dhsports. Because really, I mean, John's bank account is missing thousands of dollars, and, we can't even get our other co-host back in the room. We have 2 more co-hosts, Mr. Bush. They won't come back on the show. They're on, vacation.
Are they working from home and they're doing this in the 5-minute breaks between, like when they're having like little coffee breaks and they're just jumping on, or they're just hanging out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what countries they're in anymore. I mean, I'm serious. I really don't. What weddings they're attending. I think Dr. Hoji was at Joy Bahar's wedding, I think, this past weekend in New York City, and I haven't heard from him since. He has a lot of friends in Hollywood. But, yeah, so, I mean, obviously, that it all comes down to funding these kind of shows. You say, you do a podcast every single day. We do one once a week. And a lot of people can go to winnow.app/DHS Sports as well, where they can get voice messages. And John, with that beautiful voice of his, will send them little messages to put them to sleep or to kind of help them spice up their lives a little bit, or maybe
that is awesome.
Get them motivated. Yeah. And so John can now send those voice messages. And we've been getting a lot of love from fans, and we want them to leave comments here on YouTube and go to the #1 Bengals podcast and subscribe. And even on Twitter, I don't know if we can pull up the picture, but I had a fan kind of show a lot of love on Twitter, and I recognize the name as being very prominent. Do we have that picture we can pull up? I think Courtney, yeah. And you can see there, very prominent political figure saying, it's, saying you're cute, baby. I don't know what that means, but I mean, I just know that we've made it. That's all I know from that. Yeah.
Hey, if you listening out there, hey, make sure you go out and check out. Find them on Patreon. Make sure you hit subscribe button. Make sure you download the podcast. I'll tell you what. This is the new wave. I came from a guy, I got in the radio business, and I started by answering phones, worked my way up to being board op, and then producing, and then do the Browns radio network stuff, and then finally got to do my own show, on radio. But what I feel, and I look at it now, the new wave is this. This is the new format. I think a lot of the other medias are behind, especially radio. If you're a young person and you want to get into the game, this is where the best content is at.
Absolutely.
And look no further, because every former athlete, every actor, everybody got a podcast now.
And most of them are on Believe, by the way. Our podcast network, the Believe Podcast Network, a lot of former athletes. But yeah, I agree to your point. I mean, these ESPN shows, well, I mean, of course, we love Ben Baby. He's amazing. But these guys have all these writers and producers and 50 people doing the job. Here it's one person. It's John Sheeran. He does all the research. He does and we have a 9-year-old intern who does the subtopics, and that's it. Very, very low budget, but yeah. So thank you, Garrett. Please stick around, but we have to wrap this up. But yeah. So for Garrett, The Truth, Bush, and John, Dolly Parton Sheeran, and Daddy Mustache Maktub. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a comment. We'll see you next time. So long. Sweetie. Bye.